My name is Vince. I'm 27 years old, and this happened when my girlfriend, Lily, and I decided to go hiking and camping just for fun. There was no real goal, no destination we were trying to reach, just the idea of spending some time together out in nature. We'd done this kind of thing plenty of times before. It always felt like the easiest way to step away from our routines and forget about the stress of everyday life for a bit. We planned the trip in a relaxed way, but we still took it seriously. The night before, we packed our backpacks with food, drinks, camping gear, and all the essentials. We left early in the morning, hoping to arrive before the afternoon so we'd have enough time to set up our tent and actually enjoy the place. The drive took about 3 hours. Our destination was a forested area in North Carolina that was known for being pretty remote and rarely visited. The farther we drove, the more the atmosphere started to change. Buildings slowly disappeared, paved roads turned into dirt paths, and without us really noticing at first, our phone signal completely dropped out. During the last hour, we were fully in the middle of nowhere. Tall trees crowded both sides of the road like they were sealing us off from the outside world. I kept driving until the road became impossible for a car to pass. Large rocks and sunken dirt blocked the way ahead. I shut off the engine and let the silence settle in around us. The moment I stepped out of the car, everything felt different. The air was colder, heavier somehow. There were no engines, no distant traffic, no signs of human life at all. Just the soft sound of wind brushing through the leaves, and every now and then, the snap of a branch breaking for reasons I couldn't see. We grabbed our backpacks and started walking along a narrow trail toward a spot marked on the map as a safe place to camp. With every step, we got farther from the car and deeper into the forest. What struck me as strange was how untouched everything felt. There were no old fire pits, no trash, no footprints pressed into the dirt. Lily mentioned that the place felt too quiet, but we brushed it off. After all, we'd chosen this location specifically to avoid people. About 20 minutes into the hike, we came across a flat, fairly open area and decided that was where we'd set up our tent. Once the tent was up and our gear was organized, the sun started sinking behind the trees. The fading light stretched the forest's shadows, making them look longer and darker. I glanced back toward the trail we'd used earlier and realized how quickly the woods had swallowed us whole. Night crept in slowly, and without us really noticing, the silence around us grew heavier. At the time, nothing seemed wrong. There were no warning signs, no sense of danger. At least that's what we thought before the night fully settled in. Darkness came fast. A small campfire burned in front of our tent, just enough to keep us warm and light up the immediate area. The sky was completely clear, not a single cloud in sight. Stars were scattered everywhere, way brighter than anything you'd ever see back in the city. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Lily and I sat next to each other, eating simple food and talking casually. Nothing important, just the usual little conversations we always had when it was just the two of us. The forest around us played its natural soundtrack. Night insects buzzing, wind moving through the trees, leaves brushing against each other. Around midnight, Lily started looking exhausted. Her face looked pale from the long drive and everything we'd done that day. She told me she wanted to head into the tent and get some sleep. I nodded and helped straighten things up inside before she lay down. I decided to stay outside a little longer. I sat alone by the fire, cracked open a can of beer, and lit a cigarette. I soaked in the quiet, watching the flames dance while occasionally scanning the dark forest surrounding us. Around 2 a.m., something changed. At first, I thought it was just in my head. The forest suddenly felt too quiet, like the insect noises that had been there all night had slowly faded away. I stopped moving and listened. That's when I heard it. It sounded like 2, maybe 3 different voices, low and distant. They weren't loud, but they were clear enough to stand out from the natural sounds. It sounded like they were talking to each other. The tone was flat and broken up, not like laughter or casual conversation. I strained to focus on the sound. I couldn't make out what they were saying. The language didn't sound familiar at all. By my estimate, it was coming from about 10 or 15 meters away from my tent, way too close to just ignore. I slowly put out the campfire and crushed my cigarette into the dirt. My heart started pounding harder. I sat there completely still for about 30 seconds, hoping the voices would just fade away on their own. They didn't. Eventually, I decided to get inside the tent. I moved as carefully as I could, trying not to make a sound, unzipped it just enough to slip in, then closed it behind me. Inside, Lily was already asleep, breathing steadily, completely unaware of what was happening outside. I lay there without moving, staring at the thin fabric of the tent, and listened again. The voices were still there, faint and distant, before slowly becoming harder to distinguish. Silence returned to the forest, but the tight, uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. I stayed awake, waiting, with the growing realization that the night wasn't done with us yet. I remained perfectly still inside the tent, holding my breath and trying to separate every tiny sound outside. Seconds stretched on forever. Very slowly, I reached out and touched Lily's shoulder, waking her up. I quietly explained what I'd heard and told her to stay calm and not make a sound, no matter what happened. She was instantly wide awake, her face tensing as she realized something was wrong. Then the voices stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't dare move. I didn't even dare shift my position. And then, without warning, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, steady. They moved around our tent in a full circle, then continued on. The way they moved reminded me of an animal sizing up its prey. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the Remington 870 I kept beside my backpack. I aimed it at the tent entrance, trying to keep my hands from shaking. A few seconds later, the tent's zipper was yanked hard. The pull was strong, but it stopped short, caught by the clip I'd secured before going to sleep. The tugging stopped, followed by footsteps backing away about half a meter. I hoped that was the end of it. It wasn't. Something started scratching at the tent door, over and over again. Each scrape got louder, more aggressive, like it was trying to tear through the fabric to get inside. The sound sent chills straight up my spine. I completely lost it and yelled that I was armed, screaming for whoever it was to back off. The scratching stopped instantly. Total silence wrapped around us for a few seconds. Then I heard multiple footsteps suddenly take off, running in different directions, fast, frantic, and completely uncoordinated. I waited a bit before I dared to step outside. Keeping the rifle in my hands, I checked around the tent. There was no one there, no noise, no movement, nothing. I told Lily we had to leave, immediately. We tore the tent down as fast as we could. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the stakes, and my eyes never left the darkness between the trees. Once everything was packed, I put out the campfire and we started heading back down the trail. We were almost at the car when a scream came from the forest. We ran. The second the car doors slammed shut and locked, a man jumped onto the side of the vehicle and started slamming against the door. His body moved in this jittery, unnatural way. His eyes were wide and feral, violent, empty, like someone who'd completely lost control. He started pounding on the window with everything he had. I told Lily I was going to get out and end it with the rifle, but she grabbed me and stopped me. She reminded me that we had no idea how many of them there really were. I started the car and began backing up. The trail was narrow and rough, filled with rocks and deep ruts. Reversing out was way harder than driving in. Every single foot felt painful because I couldn't risk popping a tire or getting stuck. I kept backing up, slow, steady. until there was finally some distance between us and him. About halfway out of the forest, the area started to open up. There were no signs we were being followed. I hit the gas and didn't stop until we were completely out of there. On the drive home, we talked quietly about what had just happened. There was no clear answer, no logical explanation for what that man wanted, or who the others were that we heard earlier. All we knew was that their intentions weren't good, and we were lucky to leave before things got much worse. We made it home safely just as dawn was starting to break. Even now, that night still plays vividly in my head. The forest that was way too quiet, the footsteps circling our tent, and the man with those wild eyes stepping out of the darkness. Since then, I've learned one thing. Not every place in the wilderness is empty because it's beautiful. Some places are empty because they're meant to be avoided. My name is Josh. I live in a small town in Colorado, and one of the things I do most in my free time is hiking and camping. My house is pretty close to a lot of campgrounds and hiking trails, so it's nothing new for me. I'm used to walking alone through the woods, sleeping outdoors, and dealing with complete silence. Honestly, that's what I go out there for. That day I chose a trail that almost no one ever used. It was about an hour's drive from the town where I lived. The trail wasn't popular at all. No ranger station, no facilities, and hardly any foot traffic. It was pretty remote, surrounded by thick pine forest and low rolling hills. When I pulled into the small parking area at the trailhead, the first thing I noticed was that there wasn't a single car there. The place was completely empty. No engines running, no people gearing up, no signs that anyone had been there recently. I shut off the engine, locked my car, and slung my backpack over my shoulder. The air felt cold and dry. I stepped onto the dirt trail cutting through the forest, and the sound of my footsteps immediately felt way too loud in the silence. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Normally you'd hear birds, insects, or at least the wind moving through the trees, but this time there was almost nothing. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. A few minutes into the hike, I heard a branch snap off to the side of the trail. I stopped and turned toward the sound. There was nothing there, no movement, no footsteps, nothing. I told myself it was probably just a small animal and kept walking, even though an uneasy feeling had started to creep in. Not long after that, I saw someone standing further up the trail. A man. He was facing away from me, standing completely still, so still that it felt like he'd been there for a long time, just waiting. I slowed my pace. Normally, running into someone else on a hiking trail isn't a big deal. It happens. But for some reason, this guy felt off. He wasn't carrying a large backpack, no hiking poles, no signs that he'd stopped to rest. As I got closer, I gave a small nod as a greeting. He didn't return it. He didn't even turn his head. I passed him at a pretty close distance. From the side, I caught a brief glimpse of his face. His expression was flat, his eyes empty, like he was focused on something I couldn't see. I kept walking without saying a word. But after a few steps, that uneasy feeling only grew stronger. I had this strange urge to look back, but I fought it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. A few minutes later, as the trail began to slope upward, my mind was still stuck on that man. The silence of the forest felt heavier now, and every small sound seemed louder than it should have been. And when I looked back toward the trail ahead, I saw him again. I froze for a few seconds, staring straight ahead. He was there, standing off to the side of the trail, not far from me, just like before. That shouldn't have been possible. I hadn't heard any footsteps, and this trail didn't have any branches or shortcuts. My heart started beating faster. I tried to stay calm, to think logically. Maybe I remembered the direction wrong. Maybe he took some other path and looped around. My brain searched for explanations, but my gut told a different story. I approached him slowly this time, forcing myself to really look. A dark jacket that looked worn out, dirty shoes. His posture was stiff, unnatural. He was standing slightly turned, not fully facing the trail. When I was only a few meters away, I stopped. I waited for him to move first. He didn't. He stood completely still, like he wasn't even aware I was there. I stepped to the side to pass him. That's when I glanced over and our eyes met. His stare was empty, cold, too focused. There was no surprise, no normal reaction to seeing another person in a remote place like this. And that's when I knew something was very wrong. I picked up my pace and put distance between us. I didn't look back, but I could still feel him there, like his presence was glued to my spine. A few seconds later, I stopped and turned around. The trail was empty. The man was gone. No sound of running, no bushes rustling. He just vanished, like he was never there to begin with. I stood there for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. I told myself maybe I was just tired, or that the isolation was starting to mess with my head. Eventually, I decided to keep moving toward the campsite. About 20 minutes later, I reached a small clearing that people usually use for camping. It was quiet, surrounded by tall trees, and felt far enough from the main trail to be completely cut off. I started setting up my tent, trying to fall back into a routine I knew by heart. Normally, the sounds of the forest calm me down, but this time the silence felt too deep. No birds, no insects, just the wind drifting through every now and then. The sun began to sink, and the shadows of the trees stretched across the ground. I lit a small campfire. The light helped a little, but the feeling of being on edge never really went away. As the sky darkened, I heard soft footsteps. The quiet snap of a small branch being stepped on not too far from my campsite. I stood up immediately and stared in the direction the sound came from. The footsteps stopped. The forest went silent again. I stayed on my feet, scanning the trees. Every minute that passed felt heavier than the last. My gut told me something was out there, just beyond what I could see. Then from between the trees, I saw 3 silhouettes. They stood apart from each other, not quite in a straight line, and they didn't move closer. I couldn't make out faces or any details, just the faint outlines of their bodies. I tried to speak, but my voice sounded weak in the open woods. No answer, no reaction. They were too close. Uncomfortably close for strangers in a place like this. I stayed near the campfire, forcing myself to stay calm, trying not to let the panic show. Slowly, one by one, they backed away into the trees. No rush, no sound, until all 3 of them completely disappeared into the darkness. The campfire was still burning, but it didn't feel safe anymore. I stood there alone in the middle of the woods with this heavy feeling that the night wasn't over yet. I stayed frozen for a while after those 3 silhouettes vanished. The fire was still there, but it didn't give off any warmth. The silence left behind felt heavier than before, like it was pressing in on me. I knew I couldn't stay the night. Without wasting any time, I started tearing down my tent. My hands moved fast, almost sloppy. I shoved my gear into my backpack without caring how messy it was. A few times I stopped just to listen, making sure no footsteps were getting closer. Once everything was packed, I put out the campfire and started heading back down the trail. The beam from my headlamp lit up the ground in front of me, casting long shadows from the trees that somehow looked taller than they had before. After a few minutes of walking, I heard it again, a branch snapping somewhere off in the distance. The same sound as before. Not loud, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't random. I didn't speed up, but I didn't stop either. I just kept walking, eyes on the trail, forcing my breathing to stay steady. The sound didn't get closer, but it didn't fade away either. It felt like something was following me from a safe distance. After what felt like a long time, I finally saw my car up ahead. The parking area was still empty, just like when I arrived. I unlocked the door quickly and got inside. When I started the engine, the headlights came on and lit up the edge of the forest. Between the trees, there was a single silhouette standing there. It didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't back away. It didn't give any sign at all. It just stood there right at the edge of the headlights. I didn't wait around. I turned the car around immediately and got out of there as fast as I could. On the drive home, my mind kept replaying what happened that night. There were no screams, no direct threats, no attempt to stop me, but their presence felt intentional, like a warning. I never went back to that trail. Even now, I still think about who those three silhouettes really were and why they were out there. They never tried to approach me, but they never truly left either. And the most disturbing part is knowing that they were aware of me being there, long before I ever realized they were watching. My name is Harrison. I work at a small office in a not-so-big city, busy enough that my mind almost never really gets a break. Lately, the job had been wearing me down, not physically, but mentally. The pressure just kept stacking up day after day. So when my time off finally came around, I knew I needed to get away for a while. I decided to go hiking and camping. That wasn't anything new for me. Nature has always given me room to breathe, and the woods are usually the one place where my thoughts actually slow down. 2 weeks before the trip, I booked a campsite online. It was in Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest, a place known for being pretty remote and rarely crowded, especially on weekdays. I left on Friday afternoon around 3. Before heading out of the small town I live in, I stopped by a store to grab some food, drinks, and a few extra supplies. Nothing felt off. It just felt like a short trip to clear my head. The drive took almost 2 hours. The farther I went, the emptier the roads became. My phone signal started dropping, and buildings slowly gave way to thick stretches of trees. When I finally reached the trailhead, I shut off the engine, locked my car, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and started walking into the forest. The air was colder than I expected. The woods greeted me with a soft, almost comforting silence. Just the sound of wind and leaves brushing against each other. That calm feeling slowly settled in, exactly what I'd been hoping for. By the time evening started to set in, I reached the campsite. It was an open area surrounded by tall trees. No signs of other campers, no human voices. I set up my tent in peace, then started a campfire as the sky began to darken. Everything felt quiet, almost too perfect. Once night fully settled in, everything went dead quiet. The campfire was the only source of light around me. At around 9 p.m., I was sitting outside my tent cooking dinner near the fire when I heard footsteps coming from the woods. At first, they were faint, almost like leaves shifting in the wind. But then they became clearer, human footsteps. A man stepped out of the darkness between the trees. He walked toward me casually, like we already knew each other. His clothes looked worn and his backpack seemed old, like it had been used for years. Without hesitation, he greeted me in a friendly tone, too friendly for someone I'd never met, alone in the middle of the woods. He said he was lost. I responded briefly, staying seated by the fire. He stood uncomfortably close, staring at the flames and then at me, and said he didn't mean to scare me. He mentioned he was surprised to find someone camping alone so far away from the main trail. Then he said something that shifted the entire mood. In a flat, almost emotionless voice, he told me that strange things had happened around that area. Creepy things. He said he'd once come across an abandoned campsite deep in the forest. Clear signs that people had been there, belongings left behind, things that, according to him, didn't make any sense. I watched his face as he talked. There was no hint of joking. His expression was serious, like he was just stating facts. After a moment, he took a step back, said goodnight, and walked straight back into the darkness without looking over his shoulder. The sound of his footsteps slowly faded between the trees. I was alone again by the campfire. The forest felt even quieter than before, and for the first time that night I realized the peace I'd been looking for might have turned into something else entirely. The fire kept burning, but my mind was on edge, with a growing feeling that the night was far from over. After the man disappeared behind the trees, I stayed seated by the campfire. The flames continued to crackle softly, but the sense of calm I'd had earlier never came back. His words kept replaying in my head, especially the way he talked about that area with a seriousness that felt way too intense to be brushed off as small talk. I opened a bottle of beer and took slow sips, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong. The forest stayed quiet, no footsteps, no human sounds, just the night growing heavier around me. Time dragged on as the fire slowly burned down. Around midnight, the air turned noticeably colder. I decided to crawl into my tent and get some rest. I zipped it shut and lay there, listening to the faint distant sounds of the forest. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up to a subtle noise. Not loud, not sudden. The sound of a branch snapping, like a foot pressing down carefully on purpose. My body immediately tensed up. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again, a little closer this time. Slow, unrushed, like someone was trying to pinpoint exactly where I was. Very slowly, I shifted my body toward the entrance of the tent. My hand reached for the zipper and I pulled it down inch by inch, just enough to see outside. The moment the opening appeared, the footsteps stopped. The forest beyond the tent was still. Too still. The faint glow from what was left of the campfire stretched long shadows across the ground. I scanned the area, searching for even the smallest movement. And then I saw him. The same man from earlier was standing not far from my tent, close enough for me to see him clearly. This time he wasn't smiling. His face looked stiff and his eyes were locked directly on the tent, like he knew exactly where I was. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. I stayed completely still, barely daring to breathe. Every second stretched on forever. I had this sick feeling that my presence had been known from the very beginning. And now I was just waiting for something to happen. The campfire in the distance crackled softly, and the man's shadow shifted faintly across the ground. I slowly pulled the tent zipper back up, careful not to make a single sound. Inside the tent, my heart was pounding so hard I was scared it could be heard from outside. One thing was painfully clear to me in that moment. I was no longer alone in those woods, and that man hadn't really left. Through the thin fabric of the tent, I heard footsteps moving slowly. Not walking away, but sliding off to the side. I didn't move. I gripped my backpack tight, hunched forward, ready to move fast if I had to. The man's shadow appeared faintly again, lit by what little light was left from the dying fire. He stopped beside the tent, not too close, maybe around 20 feet away. Far enough to stay out of clear view, but close enough that his presence felt terrifyingly real. I stared at the tent wall in front of me, praying there wouldn't be any sudden movement. Time felt like it was crawling. Every second weighed heavier than the last. There was no sound except the weak crackle of the fire and the wind brushing through the leaves. About 15 minutes passed. No breathing, no footsteps, no sign that the man was still standing there. The silence felt worse than any noise. I waited even longer just to be sure that the quiet was real. Finally, I slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The area around my tent was empty. The campfire was almost completely burned out. There was no sign of the man, no movement between the trees. The forest was quiet again, but not the way it was before. This was the kind of silence that comes after something has already happened. I didn't take any chances. I stepped out of the tent and immediately checked my surroundings. No one was there. The ground around the tent looked slightly disturbed, but not enough to be certain of anything. That's when I realized I wasn't going to be able to sleep again that night. With my hands shaking, I started tearing down the tent. Every sound, the fabric rustling, the poles scraping, felt way too loud in my ears. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the darkness, half expecting something to step out of it. Once everything was packed into my backpack, I made sure the campfire was completely out. A thin trail of smoke rose for a moment before fading into the night air. I started walking back down the trail toward my car. My pace was fast but controlled. The forest felt different at night. Every shadow looked suspicious, and every small noise kept me on edge. After what felt like a long time, I finally saw the silhouette of my car in the distance. My heart started pounding again. Part of me was scared I'd find something wrong with it, like it had been messed with, or worse, left with some kind of warning. But the car was untouched. I opened the door, got in, and started the engine without hesitation. The headlights lit up the narrow trail as I drove away from the campsite. I didn't look back. I made it home safely, but that night has stayed with me ever since. I still think about that man, the way he showed up claiming he was lost, the way he talked like he knew far too much about the area, and the way he stood in front of my tent, silent, waiting, without ever explaining anything. I don't know what he really wanted that night. All I know is this: if I had stayed any longer, this story might have ended very differently.